Well, good evening, and I'd like to call to order this Committee of the Whole meeting of the Town of Saugeen Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the chambers this evening. Our first order of business is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. You can do so now or when it arises. None declared, then we have no additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda. And this evening we have 3 deputations, and the first one is Hardy Henry. He's here about Organizing Committee for the Southampton Coliseum 40-year celebration. Welcome, Mr. Henry. Coming up. Yep. Keep an eye on your assistant there.
Yes. Got to put my cheaters on first. And to the Mayor and the members of Council, thank you for taking the time to hear from me, Hardy Henry, and my wife, Ginny, as we're here representing the Coliseum 40th Anniversary Party Planning Group. As some of you might know, I was happily employed by the town of Southampton, Saugeen Shores, for 38 years until I retired 2 years ago. I worked 35 years of my 38 years at the Coliseum, so most people would know me from the Coliseum through various events in the building and the town, and the rest of the time at the Plex. So we're here to give you a slideshow and some history of the building and hope you enjoy it. Thank you, and miigwech. Look at the slideshow. This deputation is being made tonight because one of our municipal buildings will be 40 years old this fall. That makes it like a good reason for Saugeen Shores to have a celebration. Southampton Arena had to be closed in December of 1975, following a provincial inspection report that found the roof had some pretty serious issues. The roof was taken off the building, and the following season it was old-time hockey in Southampton, in an open-air facility and playing under the stars, and hopefully a full moon. It was a cold season and interesting time, but as the snow melted and the rest of the arena was demolished. Almost immediately after reading the report that closed the rink, a group got together calling themselves the Rink Replacement Committee, and later the Coliseum Committee. The sign at the beer store, which most of you probably know, in Southampton, might have said the town was a summer wonderland, but everyone knew that a place for winter wonderland activities was very important. The volunteer committee were busy. They worked with the recreation department to design a building. Their fundraising efforts were incredible within a very short time period. On November 12, 1977, less than 2 years after the old Southampton Arena had to close, the new Southampton Coliseum doors were opened with a huge grand opening celebration. The celebration then included an open house, a social hour, a banquet, and dancing. The chair of the committee, the late Doug Mandrell, in his message at the time said that the Southampton Arena had served the community well for 49 years, and the hope was that the Coliseum would give us another 49 years, which I'm sure it will. So here we are 40 years later planning to have another celebration that does some of the same things again. A bit of an open house with family skating, some happy hour social time, some dancing, and a gathering of family and friends to remember old times and days gone by. Southampton Mariners, they were all local players, local volunteers for the community, and they enjoyed on a Friday night of everybody getting together at the Coliseum. Help us get the word out by connecting with our Facebook and Instagram pages. People have shared started to share stories and photographs here ahead of the November 4th party. And we want people to share news via their own networks. Hey, look at this good-looking machine in a recent post. Blue always loved being the center of attention, who had two good Zamboni drivers. Usually the Zambonis last 10 years, but we had Big Blue for 18 years. That's how well we looked after it. Coaches, players, and referees from out of town said that we had the best ice around. We hope people share memories about their experiences in the Coliseum, playing hockey or skating or curling. Over 40 years, there's been a lot of events in the Coliseum and Annex that we can talk about. We had 2 summer craft shows, which was the Hobby and Craft show, and the late Helen Gownlock looked after that. We had the Bill Norton craft show. We had roller skating, which was very popular back in the day. We had hundreds and thousands of people in the building. We had 2 bingos in the summer, which was the Rotaries in the Tuesdays, the Optimist on Thursdays. We had the Summer Catholic Church in the Annex that we set up for 700 people because their church was too small to handle everyone. We had summer hockey schools. We had summer figure skating. We had Kitty Corner up in the green room. We had weddings, steak and doughs, Oktoberfest, benefit dancers, and we had the wagon train, which involved a lot of the RVs up at Jubilee Park, and they came to the Annex for dinner, which was provided, and dances. So there was a lot of setups and takedowns with tables and chairs and stage sections. We had the Carson Trade Show, we had shindig dances, and who can remember when Max Webster rocked the place? And also we had All-Star Wrestling, which I can remember taking Sweet Daddy Siki and his guitar down to dressing room 3. And I had Bobo Brazil. I had to take him down to room 4. So much has happened in the Grand Old Lady on Albert Street, and we'd be happy to have some earlier memories too about the old rink and colorful characters that have played on our ice here and used the building. Our small 40th anniversary committee has given council a written request asking for some financial help if we need it as the party gets closer. We're finding many community partners interested in being involved, but to help us out, we would be good to know that there is some money to help us if we need it. We have an estimated budget of $2,500, and you can see the dollar amount broken down in this slide. Council's support will be very helpful in ensuring that the Coliseum has the party she deserves. Great things happen here when the community gets involved. For over 100 years, well, you can see from the ice history here that the community has either made ice and helped pay for ice over 100 years. And it is amazing that in less than 2 years, the community helped tear a rink down and build the Coliseum. I had to show a picture of my former boss, Ted Quinnell, taking the plunge for a cause on the bottom right. And up in the top right is the mayor, the late Mo Dwyer. I also have a picture of me at home when I was on the dunking machine. There was a long lineup because, of course, I was a Zamboni driver. 2 years to build the Coliseum and the Annex. The Annex 2 hasn't been quite the success story yet. Maybe Ted Quinnell is still working on it. It was planned for the north side with dressing rooms and stores, but we'll wait and see. I'd like to finish by extending an invitation to everyone to come out to the Southam Coliseum on Saturday, November 4th, and be part of our very big 40th anniversary party. In case you're wondering why the Coliseum is a she, here's the story. As members of the community, the Coliseum or community centers know that they are the hub of our small towns, where everybody meets and gathers for different events. In the big city of Toronto, back in the day, they had Maple Leaf Gardens on Carleton and Church, which they called the Grand Old Building on Carleton Street. So back in the day, I called the Coliseum up in the front advertising sign of the building, the Grand Old Building on Albert Street, where I put the scheduled events, winter and summer, on the front board. That is why I called her the Grand Old Building on Albert Street. Don't forget, in another 23 years, it's a short time away, the Plex will be 40 years old. So maybe the community will have another cause for another celebration. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Harold. I'm sure there's some really good stories to tell in there. Maybe perhaps we'll hear them that day, but...
I could write a book.
Oh, you probably should write a book.
I could.
The museum, actually, we're at a very good exhibit at the museum on the weekend, and that would be a great place for that story to tell about.
Yes.
Because too often those little local histories can easily get forgotten just because they don't get recorded and kept somewhere. But thanks very much. We all look forward to it. I don't know if any member of council wants to make a comment or anything. I can say I really look forward to the event. I was there at the first one when it opened, and it was a great night. I won't say any more than that. But and I plan to be there on the 4th. So thank you very much, Harold. And I guess the request we can direct that to staff for resolution. I don't think there'll be much of an issue with the request. Right. And if you need anything, just call our staff and we'll help you out.
Well, thank you so much for everyone for your time, and hope to see you all there November 4th.
Okay, thanks.
For the Grand Old Building. Thank you.
Thanks, Harold. So our next deputation is Nicole Egan. She's an Economic Development Officer for the County of Bruce, and she's here to update us on the Bruce County Economic Development Annual Report for 2017. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi, everybody. Is this on? I'm new to this particular... Wonderful. Better? I'm only 5'3". The quarter is very important when you're this height, but I thought it might be high enough. So I'm going to talk very briefly. I know you've all received the slides, but what I wanted to do today was, one, take an opportunity to introduce myself. I've not met most of you or any of you, with the exception of maybe 2 previous to today. So I'm the new, one of the new economic development officers with Bruce County, and I represent the sector work that we're doing around energy, agriculture, and tourism. What I'm here to do today is look at this lovely annual report, which really only looks at 8 months, so it's a bit of a different annual report, but we wanted to align ourselves with the work that Stilling has been doing around the nuclear strategy so that we could go and look at the 2 things in tandem. What I'll be doing is taking you through a whistle-stop tour of how we're doing, our plans to action, and how we're planning on measuring our success, what those outputs look like, what the values in your communities look like, and what we can look forward to in 2018. I'm happy to take any questions either during or after, so just shout. So the report itself measures, as I've mentioned, performance on the programs and the values that they have. It's also looking at the influence on business growth in the community. So we've tried to break that down into a timeline from 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and 7 to 10 years. We're obviously in the planning and very early stages, so this 8-month period really looks at some of the foundational work that we've done and some of the early level progress that we've been able to see. The strategic plan, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, acknowledges a macro approach which supports all of us working together. And so we've tried to continually tie those lines together where the municipality works with the county and then how we work with our local leaders in terms of the chambers and the BIAs and all of those good people as well. We can measure outputs and outcomes, but the value benefit piece in terms of impact and assessment is really the most difficult piece. So you may have gotten calls from some of my colleagues, or you may be knowledgeable about what's happening in terms of our ongoing report cards, that's that assessment tool piece. So we're trying to look at how does, for example, the money that we contributed by way of sponsorships and grants, how does that leverage into a community? Does that mean that there's another 5 times the spending? What does it look like? So it's not as straightforward as just saying these are the outputs and these are the outcomes. We also try to look at that in-between piece around the values and the benefits as well. We have broken out into 2 separate sector focuses and then the business development focuses. As I mentioned, my focus is sector development, and I'm specifically tasked with looking at tourism attraction, product development, and I think that's probably the piece that most people are familiar with in terms of the visibility around Explore the Bruce and programs like that. Our nuclear energy, Stelina will talk about nuclear specifically, but in the world of energy, I'm tasked with looking at a cluster strategy, which is something that I'll talk to you all more about in the very near future, but for right now it's about scoping projects and trying to ascertain how we can best use the resources that we have and really derive value from the resources that are already here and sort of leverage the foundations to build a bigger cluster piece. Agriculture, similarly, will be looking at those sorts of models and how we move that forward. Business development, on the flip side of that, my colleague who isn't here with us tonight looks at business to Bruce, and that's more about marketing and how we attract entrepreneurs and businesses to move here. So, on to the fun stuff, key performance indicators and our action plan reporting. That is really difficult to read, but it could just be that I'm not wearing my glasses. So we have tried to look at figures that are quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Encouraging, I suppose. These figures are nice stories to see. So we've looked at our new business startups, and we've looked at the summer businesses, training engagement. So that's all of the outreach and operator outreach that we're doing. There are some online statistics there as well in terms of reactions per post and social media engagement, and then website engagement, obviously, as well. I'm not going to read verbatim the figures, but I'm happy to take any questions at a later stage if there are any about the figures themselves. This is you guys. So great news stories, and again, those figures are a little bit difficult to read, but you're ranking 4th and 5th in terms of the self-assessments that are done across the county. So that's great news, and that's down to all the work that's being done at this level and by the local agencies and volunteers as well, depending on the various committee structures. We have had some great successes in Business to Bruce this year, so we wanted to highlight a few here with you all today. And as a sidebar, I do apologize. I spent 11 years in Ireland, and I speak incredibly quickly. So I've just sort of caught my temp there, and if I'm speaking too quickly, just give me a bit of a slowdown. But as I mentioned, these are some of the success stories, and we wanted to sort of bring that visual piece there to sort of express these as well, because I think that the best thing that we can do as a county and for all of you is to really start understanding that the value of that brand piece and that the people stories and that sort of storytelling is really the important thing. I think the presentation before me today is a really good illustration of that. What people care about and what resonates with people is the community conversation, what's happening in terms of investment and why people choose to come here. So the surf shop is a great story. This is a story of somebody who's moved here because she wanted to be able to start a company herself and wanted the supports that Bruce County and others were able to provide her, and she's had a really successful time. So telling those stories around the human piece and that work-life benefit is what we're trying to do on a continuous basis. Just a couple of other visual illustrations of that, so some summer programs, and then again Spruce the Bruce, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. These are some of the pieces that were achieved through Spruce the Bruce funding in part. And again, visuals. This, of course, is Lion's Head, not near here, but yeah, we've tried to sort of just provide a bit of a visual summary of everything that's been happening and all the success stories. And again, more of the same in terms of Explore the Bruce and focusing on the tourism side. Now, outcomes. Obviously, what we're looking at in terms of the long term is growth of our tax base and growth of our population, diversification of the economy, and business retention and expansion. Those are the big high-level goals. But what this annual report does is just allow us to take a quick snapshot view at what we've done in the past 8 months. and what you can look forward to in 2018. So more, again, around that business development action plan that my colleague is working on, and then the sector development action plan is what I am tasked with working on, and I look forward to engaging with all of you around some of those ideas in the world of energy and the world of agriculture as well. That's it. In terms of conclusions, I guess really the big point here is that from the community and storytelling perspective, it's really important for us to understand that there's no standalone initiatives. So I'm always interested in seeing what people are doing on the ground level and how that fits into what we're doing at that macro level, and how we can make sure that you're getting all the support you need. And if there's anything that we can do to provide more value, we're happy to do it. And I'm certainly happy to have those discussions and see if there is any sort of capacity building that we can be doing that we're not already doing. We'll continue to do annual reports, and we'll do that with a view to measuring our impact and adding more value wherever possible. That's it.
I don't know if that's there. Thank you, Nicole. Excuse me. Any questions? Start with Councillor Grace.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Nicole. It's nice to see the some of the work that we did in our first Economic Development Committee coming to fruition through you. I did have a question about the page that was entitled Key Performance Indicators. Under the business development section, it said right at the first figure was the new business starts, jobs through business to Bruce, and the results were 8 out of 13. Does that mean that those businesses, that 5 of those businesses did not continue?
No, so it's actually 8 new businesses and 13 jobs.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
It's just from a graphical representation perspective. It's interesting that you mentioned that. We talked a lot about metrics this morning in my team meeting, and one of the things we said was that we need to look at something like infographics or something that's a little bit more obvious, because to me, like you've just pointed out, it's not necessarily evident exactly what some of these pieces mean, but the figure is actually 8 new businesses and 13 jobs.
Thank you.
No problem.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question would be around the assessment tool slide and analysis that I would have thought that from the looks of our community and our organization, business development, etc., that we were in a good position to start with. So I don't know how you would put a ranking score on your starting point, but I do feel for Paisley and wonder, this is a Bruce County initiative and a Bruce County tool. Is there some mechanism that's going to say to you in the future years that you will look at those ones that are possibly lower on your rank system, on your assessment tool from analysis, and say, we want to disproportionately apply some leverage to that community to bring it up to anything what we do well for Paisley will do well for all of us.
Yeah.
And so I would be looking forward to that kind of analysis piece as well.
I think it's an interesting point. What we've tried to do is number one, the self-assessment, but where you're coming from and where you're going is different depending on the resources that your community already has. So we are absolutely trying to work, and Paisley is an interesting example, because I know there's some work happening right now around getting their community organized to start accepting grants and to start doing a little bit more business development work. And we're certainly trying to leverage the successes that the stories that we've learned and those key learnings from other communities. So I think you're right. I think we do have to sort of raise the water for everybody to sort of float above, if that's not a very good analogy. But I think we all understand that when one community does well, the whole county does, and we're certainly continuing to focus our energies there.
Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for your presentation. On slides, pages 5 and 6, I would think every community would like to be number one at the top of the list. I was a little surprised with business development, but I should study those numbers a little closer in terms of what we're doing well and not so well in our community from a business development standpoint. But I just wondering if there's any correlation between, when you talk about business development, in the next slide, business to Bruce success stories, I see a dozen success stories, and I don't see any relating to Saugeen Shores, which surprised me. Is there any correlation between, be point blank, we did have the Business Enterprise Center in this community for a good number of years, financed by Saugeen Shores, funded by Saugeen Shores. That office pulled out, went under the county structure about a year ago, I think. Any correlation between? That's a little bit of a loaded question, I know, but losing our Business Enterprise Center, I think at least I had some question whether it was a good or bad move. But not having that Business Enterprise Center located right here in this community versus under the county structure, has that had any impact on when I take a look at these business to boost success stories, for example? I mean, I know when Joe was here and with the Business Enterprise Center, she came yearly and told us about lots of success stories with new business starting up. Is there any correlation between the two?
It's an interesting question. I wouldn't want to speculate, but my feeling is that, or my understanding at least to date, is that the Enterprise Center has sort of been replaced by the Business to Bruce piece that's operating out of the library locally, fairly locally. I wouldn't have metrics on what sort of an entry they get versus what the last Enterprise Center had, but I'm certainly happy to look in to see if we have some of those metrics. I would like to think that the current model is offering increased capacity and increased opportunities for people, but again, I don't want to speculate. I think the only important or the only interesting point I'd make is that none of the other communities have that sort of additional enterprise outreach, so it shouldn't be making a difference in terms of ranking 4th or 5th as distinct to 1st or 2nd.
That was part of the, when the Business Enterprise Center was here and operated, the staff here reached out all across the county and provided that service all across the county. And it was a thought at the time that perhaps it should migrate to the county. And that's one of the reasons. And it's got more resources now, Mike. But that's a legitimate question to ask for sure. And Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your question. Just to that, I have a question, but just to that previous point, it's important to note that those success stories that the Business Enterprise Center always posted were always county-wide success stories, right? They were always about things going on everywhere, not just in Saugeen Shores. So I think that's an important point to make. But I wondered about, back to this value benefit assessment tool, and it's interesting to see, but I guess I'm wondering, is the County of Bruce itself measuring itself against this assessment tool or an assessment tool like it in terms of its value, benefit, impact on economic development across the county? I think that there's, you can see happening out there, particularly when it comes to county planning, that from my perspective, it seems as though in certain cases the planning department at the county is a drag on the local economy. Certainly, we've seen just in the last week where they are fighting local businesses who want to expand in areas just like in Paisley, right, where they put up a wall, and we rely on it comes to the point where elected officials have to overcome that wall, and that drag has to be having an impact. I mean, that's what we see publicly, where ultimately that business owner was able to overcome it and get that development to happen. But other businesses probably won't be as aggressive or potentially as willing to put up with that drag. And so I wonder, is the county assessing itself and saying, what impact are we having on business development? What impact are we having on community development? Marketing promotions, the county's always been great at marketing and promotions, Explore the Bruce, all those things, has really been an excellent partner in all that. But I would like to see the county assess itself on that front and then look at the red tape that it has in place there and say, is this serving the interest of business development in the county of Bruce? Is there such a metric that the county's applying?
We do have ways in which we assess our own behavior, and it's interesting that you mentioned red tape, because one of our tasks specifically at the moment is to sort of reduce that red tape and see what we're doing and whether it's adding value. The inner workings of that in each department I absolutely couldn't speak to, but I'm happy to go back and have a look at what that looks like and come back and provide that information through Linda, I imagine, as someone who would send that assessment type piece to, because I really would like to provide a little bit more in terms of the detail level. But we do have assessments. It's not exactly the same as your corporate scorecard, but we certainly are looking to be transparent in the successes and the challenges that we have as well.
Councillor Grace.
I have one more question, and that's going back to that value benefit assessment tool. The numbers, like for instance Walkerton, the 24 that they got from business development, does that mean 24 businesses were developed?
No,
Is
so
that a score
it's a self-assessment score, and to be perfectly honest with you, one of our coordinators assists counties and the local businesses with the completion of this, so I don't want to speak in any detail to it because I will be absolutely wrong. But I'm happy to go back and have a conversation with my team and come back and give you some more of the specifics around that assessment tool. But it isn't as black and white as saying this number of businesses opened. The previous slide it's 8 businesses and 13, but these are sort of a matrix of a number of different variables and then that self-assessment basis. So how's the marketing in those areas? What are the hours like? There's a number of different factors.
So by self-assessment, do you mean that Walkerton did their own assessment?
And the county helps them. Yeah, the county steps in and looks and says, is this reasonable? Does this add up, for lack of a better word? But yeah, they are self-assessments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Well, thank you very much, Nicole, and
Thank you.
we look forward to this plan unfolding. I know there's lots of exciting things going on, and we're looking for...
Wonderful.
Yep, thank you. So our next delegation then is Stelina Williams. She's the business investment specialist for the energy sector in the County of Bruce, and she's here again about an annual update. Welcome, Stelina.
Thank you. So I am actually, so my position is jointly funded between Bruce Power and Bruce County. And I started just a little over a year ago when Bruce Power and Bruce County launched the initiative through a partnership. So essentially so it was around last September that the initiative was launched, and it was really kind of recognizing the importance of working together to realize the economic benefits of Bruce Power's life extension program, and that billions of dollars would be invested in the plant, and we needed to make sure that some of that money was seen locally and the benefits were realized locally, which was kind of the driving force behind launching the initiative. And really, it was also to help secure the area as basically a nuclear energy economic hub, which was able to support and sustain Bruce Power and the region as a world leader in the nuclear sector. And I'm happy to say that in the past year, I think that we are steps closer to doing that, in particular with our supplier expansions. And basically, last September, we established a nuclear industry investment strategy, which was just, designed to guide the initiative, which included a vision, goals, and action items. And a detailed one-year update was prepared on that. And I know a couple of weeks ago, it was sent to all the municipal clerks in the county to table as an information item. So hopefully that longer report has made its way to you. But today, what I really wanted to focus on was our goal around supplier expansions and to the goal to expand the regional supply chain network to support Bruce Power's long-term needs. So to date, this is just a brief overview of where our successes have been. There's been 7 office spaces leased by suppliers, which were existing spaces, existing vacant spaces, 1 existing manufacturing facility purchased, 9 acres of land purchased, and just as a result of all the development, I know that land being serviced is happening across all the communities. And as a result of the 8 suppliers and now 9, because we just announced 1 more this week, or last week, we're looking at over 120 projected jobs in the next few years. And this is just from these supplier expansions kind of announced commitments to date. So largely, so who have we announced? Amic Foster Wheeler, Black & Mac, EMC Power Canada, Kinetrix, RCM Technologies, Rolls-Royce, Sargent & Lundy, SNC Lavalin, and most recently Stantec. And largely in this first round, what you're really looking at are companies with a long-standing relationship with Bruce Power. They have multi-year agreements in place and are world leaders in their area of expertise. So for a lot of them, it just made sense to come and to come quickly. And many of them are also engineering firms. And I think as a result of their expansions, I mean, we've really poised our region to become a bit of a regional nuclear engineering cluster. So I did want to talk a little bit about the process when I'm working with suppliers. to give some background on kind of how the relationship unfolds with suppliers and the decisions that they make on where to locate and what stage in the process that they're at and whatnot. So as part of supply chain's local content requirement, suppliers must indicate during the bidding process that they have kind of thought about what their local presence might look like. And so at this stage, they're generally referred to me by supply chain, and I respond by providing them with some option based on what they've identified as their needs, whether it's, 1,500 square feet of office space, or warehousing, or whatever the needs may be. But often this occurs very early in the process. So we're looking at this initial inquiry happening even before they've put in a bid for some work. So it may take several months before actually do follow-up and then they actually pursue any of those options. And it's really just this initial scan to be able to demonstrate that they've started looking. And so in terms of what the needs are, so we had the first round, which is office space. I think that we're almost home with all of them. And now we're kind of looking into a bit more of a second round. I'd say they're more contract project-based type operations, where should they secure this larger contract, then they'll move forward with larger standalone office space or warehousing, lay down areas, lab space, maybe some sort of a training facility, things like that. So we are starting to look a bit more at the bigger kind of pieces. Right now, though, a lot of them are largely looking for a transitional space. So you're really looking at 2 to 3 offices, move-in ready, until they really understand what their longer-term needs are. So really a lot of that support at that point is to help them get here so that when they need to grow, they can connect with David or Jessica to help them to understand what their needs are and to help them to grow in the community. So at this point, a lot of what I'm focusing on is just get them here. And so continuing to stay informed about available spaces, in particular ready-to-move-in spaces, is critical, and any other facilities or land that's serviced or whatever else might be readily available is quite helpful. The only other piece that I might mention is factors motivating specific location decisions. I mean, really, I'm here to present information to suppliers based on what they've identified as their needs, and they make the decision on where the best place is to locate. Largely, it has been based on buildings that they can move into rather quickly. You will find, or I have found, that some companies make a decision based on more services and amenities. Others may make it based on more hotel options. Others just have a personal affinity to one area. I mean, there's just one company that spent, summers going to the beach and or to cottages in Southampton, so there's a bit of a personal affinity with that area. And then really just many have been coming here for years, and it's what they're more familiar with. And so it's largely what's ready, and then kind of what does the community have that'll kind of meet our larger needs. So on the next slide, this is really an overview. So this doesn't capture all 27 suppliers that I've been working with, because some are a bit earlier in the stage. But what I wanted to do with this slide, and I think I did this back in July, and I've had a few more come on board since. But really what I'm trying to do with this is show kind of the breadth of options that have been provided to suppliers based on the information received from the various communities. So for Saugeen Shores, and I think the number is actually more than 6 now, but 6 office space options provided to 6 suppliers, 2 building warehouse type building options provided to 9 suppliers, and land options provided to 2 suppliers. And what this is really telling you, one, is that there's a bit of a mix of what companies are looking for between kind of office space and warehousing. And I can tell you that nobody to date has secured warehousing anywhere from all of those that have started looking. And for office spaces, then the need just kind of continues. And I just wanted to highlight a little bit with this slide how we communicate updates on the initiative. We do have an advisory committee that's made up of 2 members from each Bruce County municipality, as well as members from Huron and Grey, and we meet quarterly. I also provide updates at the CAO's quarterly meetings, Bruce County's, updates to county councils. Written reports include monthly updates to the advisory committee, as well as milestone updates. And then I will, if invited, I generally don't say no to an invitation, so I generally will, if you want me to come talk to your business association or provide an update to your economic development committee, I'm always happy to do that as well. And just lastly, looking ahead, continuing to work with the suppliers who are expanding into the area, continuing to work closely with supply chain to identify additional suppliers. In particular, is there a second tier now that we should really be focusing on over the next year, and what are their needs? Continuing to work with communities and understanding existing buildings and land available, and then continuing to provide updates. And on November 7th is our Economic Development and Innovation Summit, which is a one-year kind of look at what we've done, what we've achieved to date, and what we want to look ahead to in the coming year. And I will leave it with that. Oh, sorry, one more thing. And I also have to hand out, it's an economic impact map that was prepared by Bruce Power on the overall economic impact of the supply chain in the area based on the constituents. So if I can maybe leave it somewhere to hand out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stelina. Excuse me. Any questions for Stelina? Councillor Minaj.
Hi. So I heard you say a regional engineering cluster, and I'm wondering, there's a lot of street chatter about the possibility of a trades and technical skills training impetus in our community, and maybe we have some municipal property that we could line up in a hurry if necessary. So I certainly hope you'll be working on that angle, because I do know that Kincardine has just announced the Bruce Power training facility to be developed and that's high tech for their reactor tools that they're going to be using. So there's plenty of opportunity for elevated work platforms and welding and other tech and trade skills. And I do know that we've got local colleges that are providing some of that as well. But I'm sure if you were to ask, we would lay down the red carpet right now, right here in this community, and provide space for a new trades learning center.
Thank you. Councillor Grace.
Thank you. Stelina, I had a specific question going back to page 2 on your report, which I think was on the supplier inquiries. Expansion. No. One back, I think. Yes. Okay. So the first section talked about just under half have secured space or are no longer pursuing local options. So what I wondered is, of that half, how many are no longer pursuing local options?
I would have to say, out of the 27 inquiries, if we have about 9 that have secured space, I'd say like under 10, like maybe 5 to 6 are.
Okay. So does that mean they
weren't successful in securing a contract?
Oh, okay. That was my question. Are they no longer involved with
Yes.
Bruce Power? Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation, Ms. Williams. And I'm just wondering, with the supplier expansions, the suppliers you're dealing with, do you have advice, any advice for this council in terms of what we may be lacking in our municipality in terms of space, whether it's commercial, industrial, warehousing? Have we lost any deals with suppliers thinking about locating to Saugeen Shores because we don't have physical space in any of one of those 3 or 4 more areas? Like our business park, for example, I think has 4 acres of space remaining, and I think 2 acres is going to be used up with our new police building. and business park will be pretty much filled up over the next couple of years. But are you looking more private private landowners where your suppliers would land on that property, or is it a combination of municipally owned lands, industrial, like commercial business park, office space obviously is private. So do you have any advice for this council in terms of what we may be lacking in your first year with your new position, in terms of what these suppliers are looking for that maybe we don't have?
Well, I think within the first year, ready to move in office space, which you can imagine nobody was really ready for. Why would you just have ready to move in office spaces sitting there when no one really expected the influx to come in the way it did? And I expect that trend to continue. Unfortunately, the way that this has been unfolding is a bit of I call it a wait and then hurry up scenario, where the suppliers are waiting to hear if they're successful, or they're waiting until a decision's made and then they say, oh my gosh, we have to get there. And so ready space is critical for that. There hasn't really been a lot of movement on building on land or securing warehouses, so I can't really speak too much about kind of anything that's been missed as a result of not having it. I mean, ready to kind of dig land, I think, will be critical for future growth of existing suppliers. Because I think that the reality is that most of them, although they're very short-sighted on their initial I need to get here stage, they do have a long-term vision of what their presence will look like.
Deputy Mayor Shervin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for coming in tonight, Selena. I'm just wondering, and it's actually maybe best illustrated on the supplier inquiries overview page, I guess. You've had all these suppliers come looking for options in Saugeen Shores, different types of options, and I wonder, what is the linkage, or how does the linkage work between yourself and Saugeen Shores Economic Development staff? I mean, we've got pretty good economic development staff in Saugeen Shores, which we've been working on developing for a couple of years, so that we could, take the wheel more on economic development in this community. And so when those suppliers come to Saugeen Shores, are you guys alerting Saugeen Shores Economic Development staff and giving them the opportunity to make the pitch to those individuals? Because I think, this council sort of speaks through that staff, right? And we can, if there are opportunities that, as my friend Councillor Myatt pointed out, that perhaps aren't readily obvious to those suppliers, perhaps we can fill those voids for them, or tell them how we might be able to solve those problems for them in order to entice them to Saugeen Shores. So perhaps you could just describe for me how the connection between yourself and Saugeen Shores Economic Development staff works when you have an interested supplier, somebody interested in Saugeen Shores.
So generally, a lot of the way that it's positioned at that stage is information sharing. So about a year ago, when we established the advisory committee, is when we started to build our inventory. And so we've asked each municipality to provide as much information they have on available land and buildings. And then I continue to receive that information through Jessica at Saugeen Shores, and we work very closely together. In terms of engaging communities during the initial inquiry stage, a lot of that doesn't happen until a company makes a decision to prevent communities from pitting against each other. One of the reasons this initiative was established was to create a bit of a level playing field across regions. I think that through the information that Jessica has prepared around investment booklets, the tool online, all of those resources are still shared with suppliers, even though they're not talking to a specific Saugeen Shores employee. So there are still opportunities to present reasons why Saugeen Shores might be a favorable location without being engaged early in the process.
Councillor Mike Mahoney.
Can I ask just a part two question, and just as a follow-up? I'm not sure. I was just asking if you had any recommendations for our community in terms of where we may be lacking. Maybe I'll direct this question Sue Darcia or Jessica perhaps. David, Jessica, have there been discussions at administrative level, like at the management level, in terms of where our community may be lacking in terms of space that may be able to accommodate the kinds of requests that we're getting from these supplier inquiries? Are there things that we as a council administration should be looking at a short-term, long-term basis? For example, the business park is near full. Are there discussions happening at that level, and will council be having those discussions in the next 6 months budget time? Have you had discussion around where we may be lacking, if we are lacking space?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. There are a number of elements that go into successfully bringing a company to Saugeen Shores or anywhere in the county. And we've been very successful with our developer forum, and that's a group that we bring together landowners, developers, and in some cases real estate agents into the same room. And Jessica and Jay facilitate the discussion. And one of the things that we've discovered through that process is that developers and the owners didn't always know each other. So we partnered those people up, so they're now working more collaboratively. And just recently we've introduced a concept of integrating our financial institutions into that. So we do have a development in town that wants to develop. That would be good for this process, but that development needs a business to anchor the development before they can develop, if that makes sense. So as recently as a couple of weeks ago, as part of the steering committee, we got a commitment from Bruce Power that they would provide to us some of these companies early on so we can connect them with the developer. And instead of, if you think about it, Councillor, you're a developer. Can you build on spec? If you've got very deep pockets, you probably can, and we've seen some success with that, but others can't, and they've got good ideas, they may have land, but they need that tenant before the commercial lenders will provide them financing. So Jessica's done an excellent job at we toured one financial institution through the town, showed them the opportunities. We are going to connect them with the developers and the landowners as one example to help put the pieces together for that puzzle.
If there's no further questions, I just want to say, Celine, I know I was at the county when this thing was, we were throwing this around, and it came together very quickly with certainly with the support of Bruce Power. And then when you came on board, and I know it's been a very, very busy year since then, and I think we've made some really great choices, and I really want to thank you for the work that you've done at the county and for all of us here. It's we really, there was an opportunity, there was something that we had never done before in this format or this way at the county. We'd always kind of around the edges, and we missed the opportunity, I think, at the first restarts, because mind you, there was a totally different set of circumstances there. But this one, I think we're well positioned to see some success, and you're part of that, so thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda then is let's see, it's a, we'll get to it here. There. It's a staff report for a pre-budget approval for our trackless, and our Director of Public Works, Amanda, will present the report.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I would like to say that being outside today, I wasn't really thinking about sidewalk plows or winter maintenance contracts, but that's what I'm here to speak to you guys about tonight. So the sidewalk plow is one of the services that we provide to our residents that we're proud of, that we actually plow our sidewalks. But it has to be a level of service and a financial commitment that we can justify. So every sidewalk plow with an operator can effectively plow 10 kilometers of road. So through our service request and call-ins, we have people call and say, I live on Trillium Drive and I would like my road plowed. We put that in an Excel spreadsheet, the length of that road, and once we hit 10 kilometers, then we can justify the purchase of a new plow. Most of the roads that have come up recently are all through new developments, so Trillium, Pearson, Buckbee, and we would even include the Oakwood, so newer developments that haven't had this attributed to them. You can see on the map where these areas are. We also will link these new developments to existing plow routes, so there's not a spot where a plow's not plowing. We want the pre-budget approval because if we tender it now, we'll have it for January. If we wait for the 2018 budget to be approved, then we probably won't have it until the summer, and then we've missed the winter for that opportunity.
Thank you, Amanda. Then the recommendation is that Council express its intent to fund this purchase to the extent allowable for the current and future from the current and future development charges, and that Council gives pre-budget approval for the purchase of an M7 series tractor sidewalk plow, growth related, with an estimate of $130,000 through the development charges reserve. Comments, questions? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to ask for a little more clarity on a couple of items in your report. I completely appreciate the idea that you're looking for a very particular piece of equipment. So the idea of single sourcing sounds attractive, but then you've got this intention to tender. So from that, can I read that if this goes through, that the tender would go out with that specific piece of equipment, thus enabling a variety of suppliers to at least consider bidding? Is that what that means? It's intention to tender, but single sourcing. So there might only be one company that actually submits a bid. Is that what that means?
That's correct. That's what our intention is, that we'll either invite 3 or we'll put it out to public tender.
Okay.
But if we hear back that the timing's not going to allow for them to respond back, then we would just like to have the option to say, okay, to one supplier, what's the price of this?
And then the financial impact statement to me is a little confusing. The report starts as though this is something that would come from development charges, but then this part would suggest that this piece of equipment has not been included in our development charges list as of yet. So by doing this, we're actually setting up that at some point we'll have to take something off. When you know, those discussions were rather lengthy, and there was lots of back and forth about items. So I'm a little bit hesitant because this will require that something come off that we've had a lot of discussion about to put it on the list. Do you know what's on that list that is expendable, that would enable this last part to come true, which would set up that you can later on slot this into the development charges so that there's a legitimate way to take money from that reserve. But to do that, you're going to have to remove something. Do you know what that something is that's coming off?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. I spoke to Jay about this because I wasn't here when the development charges were done, and we had Hemson review it to make sure that what we were doing was allowed within the Act. And in 2016, we were supposed to buy a loader through development charges. We bought that loader, but we bought it through fleet because it was a replacement. And so you cannot replace fleet with development charges. So it was $130,000 as well. So it's honestly, it's going to be item for item. We're going to remove the loader from the development charges and update it with a sign.
Okay, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Amanda, how many do we have? How many of these plows do we have right now?
We have 3 currently.
Okay, and so are those dedicated to an area in a particular, like to a particular area? Can they be used in lots of parts of the town?
They are dedicated, so each plow driver has a plow route. We publish them every year. So right now there's 2 track lists that do Port Elgin, one on the west side of the highway and one on the east side. And there's one plow that does all of Southampton, their sidewalks. If you want the sidewalk routes, we can. Yeah.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is more about confirmation in discussion, and I've had a discussion with Amanda on more than one occasion about connectivity as well, and driving backwards from the schools and from the downtown core. So I'm a little confused with Trillium Drive, for example, and I get why they would want it, but it doesn't really meet that connectivity thinking, and I've asked about that as well with development of sidewalks, trying to connect the sidewalks where we don't have them now, where people are using them. So actually, it turns out in the particular area where I live, over Oakwood Drive and Woodland Drive and Brentwood Drive, there's a fair amount of students going to the high school there, and there are very few sidewalks that they can use. So I would hope that we would overlay the demand for building new sidewalks with the requirement to snow plow them in the future based on a continuing asset management plan that says working away from the schools, working away from the downtown core would be our better approach, or making sure that Bruce Street, now that it's a major collector road and it has more sidewalks being developed, and we had that conversation that Bruce Street would be included in sidewalk snowplow operations. It's not at the moment, and I believe Amanda's going to look at it. Thank you.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to take advantage of a sidewalk snow plowing agenda item to comment that the new trackless plows work great. Where they don't work great, though, so I'm just kind of putting this into your head, is at corners where there's a change in the grade because it's slanting down with sort of a ramp out to the street. And what often happens is the plow does a great job on the sidewalk, then it hits the corner where you have to get off the sidewalk, cross the street, and get on another sidewalk, and it's just a pile of slush and mess. So if you can somehow work into some of this plowing, that there's particular attention given to strategic corners where the corners become impassable, which the trackless was purchased to do a great job on straightaways. It doesn't seem to be working so well on the corners, so I'll just throw that into the mix, and thank you for listening.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just first wanted to point out that this is a great news story. An additional 10 kilometers of sidewalk plowed in the town of Port Elgin in a whole bunch of areas where I have received complaints about sidewalk plowing over and over and over again for years. So I think it's a great news story, and I hope that we get that map up on the website somewhere so people can see which sidewalks that we're going to add to the sidewalk plowing. I wanted to just ask the question. We've heard in the past with regard actually to our downtown community improvement plans. Those plans recommended that we institute more projecting signs in our downtown core areas, but it's something we've been unable to do practically, or to allow practically, and the reason we've been given often is because the sidewalk plows don't fit comfortably under the projecting signs, that you, in order to get them high enough that the plows can go under them, you have to put them too high and it looks ridiculous. But it's possible, it's obviously possible because lots of communities do it, to have sidewalk plows that work with projecting signs. So I guess I just wanted to put out there that I hope that this M7 series trackless, or whatever unit you ultimately purchase, will work and be short enough to work with standard height projecting signs in downtown core areas, so that perhaps maybe we could make a switch out so that we could make that possible in Port Elgin for now, hopefully in Southampton someday in the future. But I'd sure like to see that happen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any further questions? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So the next agenda item then is Environmental Services and Transportation Report, and it has to do with the Chantry View reconstruction. And again, our Director of Public Works, Amanda Frost, will present the report.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. When we posted our list of projects for 2017, we heard that Chantry View Drive may be a project that needed more attention from residents than some of the others. So we decided to have an open house in August so that we could gather feedback from the residents on this project. At that public meeting, we heard different comments come back. A lot of them had to do with cyclists going to the tennis courts, the width of the asphalt, and the aesthetics of the area. So coming back from that meeting, looking at what we could do to incorporate some of these comments means that we're tendering late in the year, which we already are seeing that prices will be higher. It's getting to the point where we'll be paying for winter heat, so we would like Council to support us in delaying this until the spring, where we will have better construction prices. It'll also give us time to look at how we can incorporate cycling-friendly elements to the design to allow this that concern to be addressed. What we would like to do is come up with a couple alternatives to the one that we presented, bring that back to council as a presentation and get your feedback before construction.
Thank you, Amanda. So the recommendation is that the construction on Chantry View Drive be carried out in the spring of 2018 to allow for 1, better construction prices, 2, staff time to incorporate cycling-friendly elements within the overall design, and 3, staff to consult with council on the alternatives and present a preferred solution to council. Oh, sorry, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions. First, so Amanda, could you tell me what the width of Chantry View Drive is right now?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it varies up and down the length, but it's about 7.5 meters for edge of asphalt to edge of asphalt.
Okay. And do the plans, as you see them right now, propose an increase in the width?
The one that we took to the public open house did increase it to 8.5 meters, so 1/2 meter on either side.
Okay. And at this point, though, the possible revision would be a decrease in what your plan was on August 31st?
So we can bring back an alternative with reduce or maintaining the asphalt width.
Okay. And then the last point of the recommendation was staff consulting with the council on alternatives. And so I wondered how, just generally speaking, how would the process include further public consultation as well as consultation with council?
Sir, because of the level of the project with the municipal Class CA process, we don't need to do anything above notification on this one. But because there was additional interest in it, and because it's seasonal and permanent residents, I don't believe that we would want to wait until having another open house for when there would be everybody back. So I think it's more appropriate for us to bring back 3 or 4 total alternatives to this council, just like the beach house when Jane brought back 5 design options for you guys to consider, allow the debate to happen in this room and then carry forward.
Okay, so does, or perhaps I could ask our CAO, do you see other opportunities for public consultation besides just around the council table?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think, in fact, Jessica Linthorne is going to be speaking in a few minutes about increased public consultation on ways, and that will be through our website. Certainly, we're happy to consult with members of the public. I may be attending the Southampton Ratepayers Association meeting coming up on Thanksgiving weekend. Provide an update there. So we want to continue to have consultation. I think that the council chamber is a good way for council to hear the information from staff. Certainly support that. We are finding that more and more people are using our website, and at our meeting with the Southampton residents, we encourage them to log in and sign up for notifications of interest to them.
Okay, thank you. Can I also I just want to make a sort of a general statement. Thank you, Jessica, for the report, or Amanda, thank you. According to our staff figures, about 150 residents attended the public open house that Amanda mentioned that was held on August 31st. I was able to read through all of the written comments from that meeting. What became clear to me, not just from the written comments but the oral comments, is that people see this project as a bellwether of how Southampton and some of the heritage areas of our municipality will be developed. A significant number of the comments said something along the lines of wanting to retain the historic, tourist-oriented waterfront community character of Southampton, and a big part of that is the streetscape. Widening the roads to suburban standards with more asphalt and concrete goes against that vision, and that vision is something that I directly quoted from our official plan sections 1.1, 1.2, 0.5.2, and 1.2.6.2. And I believe this is a vision that we should be protecting because it's very important to our economic development goals. We heard tonight about the importance of tourism in our economic development strategic plan. Protecting our community's historic character, I think, is integral to that plan. People choose to invest in Southampton or invest in Port Elgin or the Saugeen Township beach communities because either as residents or as tourists who visit for part of the summer, they go there because they love its charming ambiance. They don't go there because it looks like suburbia. So there are also, I think, practical reasons why we need to rethink what our streetscapes should be. And I'm was very happy to learn that apparently we are going to have an upcoming transportation master plan, which would include an active transportation study, a stormwater master plan, which was delayed from this year, and standards, information in these areas are evolving, and we should be taking the opportunity to integrate those ideas into our future planning. I think that's a great opportunity. But there are also practical reasons why I asked, for instance, about the width of the road on Chanterview. I did some reading. One of the studies that I read was a study by a Canadian engineer who was the senior transportation planner for the City of Toronto. And he wrote a study that was presented in June of 2015 where he definitively said wider lanes, and he defines those as those over 3.3 to 3.4 meters, are associated with 33% higher impact speed rates and higher crash rates. Narrower lanes in urban areas result in less aggressive driving and more ability to slow or stop a vehicle over a short distance to avoid collision. He cited 88 sources, as well as his own studies of Toronto and Tokyo when he wrote this report. But really, his work is sort of the definitive new work showing a question that arose in our last council meeting, which was, do we have empirical evidence that wider lanes are more dangerous? And this seems to be the case according to his work. Another issue that I think is important that we need to consider that is, I think, integral to this issue of roads management is stormwater management. Our official plan says that stormwater management techniques are constantly evolving, as well as being dependent on the location. Thus, new development shall promote the use of best management practices and standards as approved by the town, but also while having regard for section 1.2.6 and 1.2.4, and those are, once again, to ensure that future development is in keeping with the character of the nearby area, and to preserve the historic, tourist-oriented waterfront community character of Southampton, and ensure that the scale of development in that community reflects this character. Other studies show that roads are leading sources of urban runoff, more than 60%, depending on the community, and as much as 80% of stormwater pollution. So studies are showing that low impact and green infrastructure practices such as vegetated filter strips at the edges of paved surfaces, porous pavers, porous concrete, porous asphalt, and narrower streets may reduce overall financial and environmental costs of stormwater management. So I am very glad to hear that our staff is looking at integrating accommodations for cycling safety. My support for this recommendation comes with the understanding and assurance that the road will not be widened, and that every effort will be made to preserve vegetation and residents' frontage, and that concerned residents on both sides of the issue will have opportunity for adequate public consultation before final plans are put into place. As I said before, Chantry View is an individual project, but I believe it's the harbinger of how we handle our future roads development in this town. Thank you.
Further comments? Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Cheryl. I believe this is the intent of Committee of the Whole, and I'm nowhere near as prepared and as eloquent as Cheryl has been, but there are points and counterpoints to be made here, and I would sincerely like the opportunity to explore this further and discuss this further. What I wouldn't want to do is ask our staff to put on another show like that transpired at the Southampton Coliseum and have to put up with some of those very venomous and negative local residents attacking staff. I don't know how we can prevent that, and maybe we can look at options on that in the future. I certainly would like to be at the entranceway and maybe ask them to change their attitudes and behaviors before they walk in the door. What I would like to say is that maintaining the character as a priority was a sore point for everyone, obviously, and it's Cheryl's made that point again. But it speaks to more than that. It speaks to, we can't just have the engineer and director of public works talk about it and not have a chief building official talk about it, because what we're finding is that people are removing the existing quaint character cottage that makes up that particularly important element of Southampton, and then they're building a very large new building, and they're building 2 and 3 car garages, and they're putting down as much concrete, more than enough for 2 sidewalks to be built along the side of their property. So on the one hand, I understand the message, and on the other hand, the demonstration isn't there. So I too would like to look at options and find out the pricing of something like an interlocking brick sidewalk instead of a completely covered concrete. What is the price difference? And so what I'm asking for is are more options on stormwater management, what you're allowed to do, Amanda, what we're not allowed to do as part of your engineering certificate for our municipality, because in the safety aspect, I get that there might be more vehicle collisions, but the sidewalk is necessary. In my opinion, that we heard from the local residents that they like to walk along the street, in a nice casual manner, and that vehicles slow down and they respect that. On the other hand, we've heard that from year-round residents that live on that particular street, including the previous mayor of Southampton, that he finds it a very dangerous street to walk on, and he's looking forward to having the sidewalk, he and his wife are, and their grandchildren. So we've got play and counterplay going on, and I'd like to know, Mr. Mayor, if we can have a more definitive, after all these comments have been made in this Committee of the Whole, can we come back again in the wintertime and have that longer, and after Amanda polishes another report possibly, can we have another session where we can get to the bottom of this? Thank you.
Well, I think the intent is, and I think Amanda mentioned it, that she's to come back with some different design options for council in preparation for tender in the spring of 2018. So I don't think we need to get into I think we've all heard lots on this, and I don't think we need to get into the merits of the project until we see some options. What we're talking about, I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. I don't mind stating your opinion. That by all means do that. You can do that to Amanda at any time. But I think really the recommendation is pretty self-explanatory. It's not saying anything about design other than we're going to go on and come back with some design options. So if you have something on the recommendation, go ahead, Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Grace's comments are well-researched and respectful of the process and also of what we're talking about. One of the things that Councillor Grace said, though, I'm not too sure that I read the same agreement in what you've written. it was said that you were voting for this because it was definitely going to reduce the width of the asphalt from 8.5 down. I don't think that that's what this says. I think this says that you're going to come back with some alternatives, right? That the 8.5 meter asphalt width could very well still be there in those alternatives. Is that, is this implying that, because when I read this and you talk about having cycling friendly elements into the mix, the width of the road plays a role in creating that safe corridor for cyclists. So I just want to make sure that I was understanding that you're coming back with alternatives that we can consider, that a couple of them, all of them may very well have a reduced width, but they might not too, one of them. Am I reading this properly?
That's correct. So one of the alternatives that will come back is what we have designed today, and that one shows 8.5 meters. But we will come back with an alternative that shows what we can do within the 7.5 meter asphalt width as well. And there may be one or two that are somewhere between 7.5 and 8.5. There's that engineering balance where we're going to look at on-street parking, we'll look at sidewalk width, we'll look at grading, we'll look at storm, and we'll look at bike facilities. There's a MTO book 18 out there that talks about the different things you need to apply to have different types of bike facilities in the way. So we'll look at all that, then come back with options. But there will be one for sure that has an 8.5 meter width, because we're going to present the option that we have today.
Sorry, thanks, Amanda. And it just means that we're going to have lots of options to discuss and have that discussion that you're asking for, Councillor Minaj. So I think we've had enough discussion on this particular item, and I'll ask. Go ahead.
I just want to reaffirm that at least one option will come back with maintaining the current pavement width.
Okay. Any further comments? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed? That's carried. So the next item on the agenda is a Planning and Development Staff Report, and it has to do with the site plan agreement with Ideal Supply and our... Oh, it's not Jay. Our building inspector, Bart, will present.
Thank you, Your Honor. Unfortunately, our development coordinator, Jay Posner, is unable to attend today, so I'll speak on his behalf. Ideal Supply, Inc. recently purchased the land at the south end of Goddard Street. Ideal Supply, Inc. will build a slightly larger than 700 meters building as shown on the attached site plan. The developer has addressed all municipal concerns and is posting securities to ensure the completion of all site improvements. Some highlights of the agreement are the developer has agreed to remove the billboard sign located on the property. The developer has agreed to allow future access to lands from adjacent lands should they develop. The developer has agreed to provide a contribution of $3,000 for landscaping and or public art in the vicinity of the land. It is recommended that the town proceed with the completing site plan agreement once the developer has deposited the necessary securities associated with the agreement and executed the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. So the recommendation is that a bylaw be passed to authorize a site plan agreement with Ideal Supply Incorporated. Questions? Councillor Mike Myatt.
To see you, Mr. Mayor, to Bart. Bart, at what point do we see, or staff see the landscape plan for that development?
There is some detail on the drawings that are provided here. If you're looking for something further than that, that'll come at a future date.
Okay, my question is to do with landscaping. With each new business that's being established at the south end of town, it's a golden opportunity to improve that whole look, feel coming into our community from the south end, which over the years, I mean, I've heard from lots of people saying the south end of Port Alga needs some tender loving care, and we have an opportunity, to make some difference there. And I read one of the lines in the report that said developer has agreed to provide a contribution of $3,000 for landscaping and or public art. So I have a two-part question there. Why were they asked for $3,000 for landscaping? I would assume that that's $3,000 over and above their landscape plan. That's my first question. And my second question is, what public art, where and why? And why the extra $3,000 in this case? I don't know whether we've requested this with past applications, but so 3 questions there.
So the first question is, yes, the $3,000 is beyond the design or the landscape plan that's been provided. They are required to do some work that isn't on their property, so that's where some of that money will go. Yep.
Sorry, part of it is my fault because in front of Ideal Supply there's a storm sewer easement, and so we wouldn't allow them to plant any trees in the front because it would interfere with our infrastructure. So they didn't have an ability to put more trees on their site that we would get to see on the street, so we came to an agreement through Jay to have them pay for trees elsewhere instead of where we wouldn't let them put them.
So that
But at the same time, we added additional trees to the side of the property.
So, Mr. Mayor, just wanted the last part of the question then. So, an opportunity to do something really special on that corridor coming in at the south end of Port Algon. Are you saying that because of the sewer, the pipes and so on buried underneath, that perhaps there isn't going to be the same opportunity that happened just across the road at the new development commercial strip, that plaza, that we won't see the same kind of look along the roadside because of the pipes underneath? Is that what you're saying?
So the plantings will be slightly different. So there'll be more grasses as opposed to full-fledged trees in that area, just because of what, the servicing of that development.
So but there still will be landscape along the roadside.
Exactly. There'll be landscaping along that side of the road, and it'll be similar to what's across the street, but it won't be exactly the same as what's across the street.
Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Bart, this is a great thing to see that we're going to have a development of this scale at the south end of town, as Councillor Mayette has pointed out. The area needs some revitalization, particularly on that side of the street. The question I have is maybe would be appropriate for Selena when she was here, but is this development, could you characterize it as one out of the nuclear impact strategy? Is this a developer that's come here specifically because of the things that are going on down the road?
So this might be a better question for Jessica.
Yes, let's have Jessica give it a chat at that, sure.
Yes, through your worship. Yes, Councillor, it is. In the document that Stelina handed out, they do identify Ideal Supply as one of their major suppliers, and you'll notice for the point for the community of Port Elgin, they have listed Ideal Supply.
The reason I ask is because I think most people associate their current location with an auto parts supplier, but Ideal does a great deal more than that in their bigger locations. So they're looking at getting an industrial electrical supply shop as opposed to the smaller one they got right now.
This is a fairly large building at 700, slightly larger than 700 meters square, so they'll be expanding more than just auto parts.
So this would have been one of those businesses that was listed on Selena's chart? Yeah, good.
Vice Deputy Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to Bart through you. There doesn't appear to be any ground signs shown in the site plan. That would be a good thing if there was not a ground sign being established here, because that would be a good precedent to start. So, is the site plan complete? Because if it's not here, does that mean that there's no intention to put a ground sign?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Minaj.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll harp on the same thing I harped on before, and when we first saw this, and I'm asking for the connectivity, the overview that says that the neighboring properties will be assembled and assimilated into one driveway entrance and exit. And it looks to me like there's a potential from the site plan that we've got some curbing on this driveway that says it will be separated from the other properties. I believe at that location we really should not be having 3 or 4 separate driveways for 3 or 4 businesses in a row there, all exiting onto 4 lanes or 2 lanes on one side there, with the possibility of 3 lanes in that location where there's a turn lane onto Bruce County Road 25. So what I would like to do is I want to vote in favor of this, obviously, but I would like to ask staff to come back with an overview of how we're going to deal with the driveways on all of those properties together and come back with a one solution, one fits all. Thank you.
So I think, I think let's not confuse that. Whatever is going to happen on those other properties, we can deal with in those development proposals if and when they come here. I think we should stay focused on what's happening here. I think there is an option, as it says here, an option to connect them. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So there is an option to connect them to those other properties. When they're redeveloped at that time, when we get an opportunity for a new site plan agreement or some other enforcement tool, we can deal with it at that time.
That is correct, Your Honor.
Thank you. So then, any further questions to it? All in favor of the recommendation? Opposed, if any, that's carried. So, I guess that's the end of our agenda. There's some minutes there, and I think there is two department head reports, and the first one is an information report on our corporate communication strategy, and I think Jessica is going to give us some information and present the report. So, the floor is yours, Jessica.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm here tonight to talk about the corporate communication strategy, and I'm really excited. This is a 3-year strategy that I've developed for the town of Saugeen Shores. So the 3-year strategy, I've left the full document in members of council mailboxes, and I have a summary document available this evening for media and for others. It will also be posted on the website. So the goal of our corporate communication strategy really is to establish the municipality as a two-way communication organization. We want to communicate two-way, openly, with internal and external stakeholders. We want to ensure that people are understanding what the town is offering, our initiative services, projects, and we want to be able to tell our story. So I've developed a number of objectives, internal objectives and external. We have 7 in total. So our 4 internal objectives, first being to better inform council, on key initiatives and project updates. We want to increase our staff awareness and understanding of the town's strategic direction. So this is directly with our corporate strategic plan. We want to connect with and engage employees using internal channels and increase level of employee satisfaction with communications from the corporate level. Ultimately, we want to connect with our employees and our members of council to increase and empower our communication and relationship. So when we look at our external objectives, to increase awareness of town projects, services, initiatives to all stakeholders, we need to increase the opportunity for two-way communication. What we really need to do here is break down barriers and open doors for the two-way communication. We want to increase increase our key messaging through local media. Our key messaging based on projects, certainly, but also our corporate key messaging, that there's some detail built in with the full strategy. So a lot of the corporate communication strategy, a big piece of it is how are we going to do that. So it's the process and the approach. In the full document, you will see a list of tactics, but behind the scenes, how we're going to do that, the process and the approach, by making that commitment to enhance our internal process to reflect best communication practice. We want to include our regular updating, improve the process around regular updates to members of council and to staff. We want to increase our media relations to ensure that we're doing that more effectively, as well as public engagement documents. Process improvements to streamline delivery of communications, or internal and external, really to ensure that that key messaging is consistent throughout the organization and that regular updates are distributed to the right people at the right time. Our proactive strategy will enhance relationships and ensure our key messages are being delivered. So Saugeen Shores is taking the initiative to open communication channels and foster that two-way communication with all stakeholders. Through various feedback, I've identified a few challenges that have come up as common themes, and these for lack of single consistent messaging from the corporation. There seems to be a lack of defined project key messaging, so different stories come from different sources, as an example. Inconsistency when we're communicating to the public, so again, it's that understanding of what is newsworthy and what isn't. There's an opportunity to close the loop with the public. So sometimes there's a public input that's collected and we're not necessarily following up as best as we can. So as I earlier mentioned, there are tactics that have been identified to address all of the challenges. In the full document, you'll notice the first section identifies challenges and then offers solutions. So just to touch base on some of our solutions, we know that we need to implement the identified communication tools and tactics in that strategy document. We want to streamline our process to reflect industry best practices. We want to educate and empower our staff for that strong two-way communication. We will be evaluating the implementation of the new tools through scheduled surveys and discussions. And you'll notice in the full document, there's success indicators set as well as an evaluation timeline. So very specific detail on when we will be evaluating what, and then cross-checking that with our success indicators. So the next step with this communication strategy is to share internally. So I plan to do that later this year, getting more in depth with members of council and staff to identify our internal objectives and talk about how we're going to do that, and then certainly increase that two-way communication with council and staff immediately. We'll be launching the strategy to the public, defining our goal and our commitment for accessible, clear, and timely communication. I mentioned at the beginning there's a summary document that's available for the media and the public this evening, and that really outlines our process approach, our objectives, our goal, but it does identify our commitment to deliver exceptional communication. We'll be implementing a few 2017 tactics that are identified in the full strategy document, and then we'll be planning for 2018 tactics. So, of course, that means looking at budget and looking at the evaluation plans for 17 to then carry on the successful tactics in 18.
Thank you, Jessica. So any questions for Jessica? Councillor Mike Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just, in 3 short words, thank you, Jessica. And this is long overdue, and having a communication strategy for this municipality, I think, is something that is a welcome addition. David, I know our CEO has really pushed hard for this as well, and thank you to you as well for bringing this whole concept forward. And so far, so good, Jessica, with what you're producing. It's first class and first rate, and just hats off to you. And I did have one quick question, and in your presentation, you talk about regular updates will be distributed to, quote, appropriate people. And so, how do you determine what the appropriate people are to make sure that the messaging we're getting out is getting to those right people? So is it you? Is it management team? Is it collectively around how do we come to that conclusion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the term appropriate people is very vague, and generally what I'm referring to there is the idea of who's appropriate in the stakeholder group. So if we're looking at regular updates, and we can use a project as an example, if there's a construction project around the rail trail, and we'll use that just as an example, that project update will then go to the appropriate stakeholders. So consistently, those updates will be available for members of council and the senior management team. Other players in that appropriate people might be the Rail Trail Association, as an example. So that group of appropriate people will depend on what the update is regarding.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm sure that Jessica and I have spoken to this too, and this is a great step, and we're going to be having a meeting this week on emergency management. And I attended a session with the AMO, which Association of Municipalities of Ontario, which I will share in my council report in the next council meeting. And in it spoke to one of the major events that took place last year in Ontario was the Mississauga block explosion, where there are still about 20 homes, 25 homes where people can't go back and live. And that whole communication strategy, who's going to give the message, how many people stood at the podium to answer questions, where was the information coming from, those things are all going to end up in our emergency management plan as well. And so we'll have to cross-pollinate your strategy and the emergency management plan to identify those communication strategies, and I expect that to happen, and that to me is interdepartmental working, and which is good news. Thank you.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking at the short form version here, and in the tactics, the town hall meetings that are mentioned appear to be CAO with staff. The strategic plan that we approved I think at the last meeting, talked about an annual town hall, but the implied thing that was that it was an opportunity for the public to just come in and have their chance to say something. And of course, we tried something and we didn't get a whole lot of people out, but I was encouraged by that being included in the strategic plan comments that were made, that would be something. It doesn't appear to show up here as an external goal. Is the intent to do communication, to improve communication or enhance communication basically via technology and not with face-to-face opportunities, which I had thought the strategic plan was suggesting an annual town hall of that nature was a good goal going forward. Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is certainly something that has been discussed. These tactics really are tactics moving forward, so 3-year moving forward. It's not to reflect that we will be dismissing any traditional forms of communication or that items like that, and I know that there was a town hall that was conducted. So some of the ongoing things will certainly still be scheduled for ongoing, and the town hall is one of them. Some of the pre-existing communication tools, and we'll use the town hall as that example, will be built into the process and approach part of the development that's still happening on my end. So building in how will we market that town hall, how will we communicate that town hall, what is that town hall, give it some definition around it. So that kind of falls into my process and approach because it's something that's already been happening. But yeah, thank you certainly for pointing out that it's not listed as one of the new external tactics. It is something we will continue to do.
Thank you, Jessica. Any further questions? Then, thank you. We have one other item here. There is another information report, and it has to do with our water inspection report. And Amanda, if you want to speak to it, or if there's any questions, you don't need to speak to it. If there's any specific questions, we'll take them. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Amanda, I just had a question about the zebra mussels, and one of the descriptions, it was talking about the fact that the intake pipe in the structure had a very heavy concentration of zebra mussels, was cleaned in 2017, and then it reinstated the zebra mussel control system. So what I just wondered if you could clarify, by reinstating, do you mean it was functioning, it was stopped to allow the cleaning and then reinstated, or had it stopped at some point already before the cleaning?
Are you, Mr. Mayor? At the water treatment or the raw water plant, we switched from liquid chlorine to chlorine gas. So manager of engineering and Aqua are trying to figure out how to get gas chlorine 2 kilometers down the pipe. So that's why it was off during that switch. And they're still trying to work through pressures on how to get that to work at this time. So it's not at 100% working. They're still working through getting that put back in place.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, and then we'll go down.
Thank you. There's a comment in here about a recommendation about security fencing around, well, they're called standpipes or storage facilities. Basically, they're water towers. I'm curious to know, Jubilee Park has a beautiful park, nice splash pad, fire hall. The area around the water tower is a recreational area because it's sloped, it's nice, smooth, kids run around there all the time. How is a recommendation like this being taken into account? And should there be any activity in this direction with both of those sites? I would hate to see a security fence like I imagine being put up there, a chain link fence, and like it would totally be not fitting into the environment. So the recommendations that are here, some of them I hope we act on them, but that would be one that I would not be quite as enamored of activity because it just doesn't fit into the surroundings. But there obviously is a reason for the recommendation, so I'm just curious to know if nothing's done, is the reason still an issue?
So through you, Mr. Mayor. Port Elgin and Southampton standpipes are 2 different. We get a lot of graffiti on the Port Elgin Reservoir, so there may be valid reason to put a fence on there such that people can stop graffitiing it. Southampton doesn't have that same problem. It's a higher visibility area. So these are recommendations that we're going to take into consideration. Adam will go out to the site and on a site-by-site basis determine if he wants to include fence in next year's budget. If he does, then you'll see that in the sanitary financial plan that is being.
Councillor Minaj, then we'll get down to Councillor Mayat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my question is for some clarity as well. I think on page 2 we talk about, allow me to look here, we're going to possibly do, on the Port Elgin standpipe, we're going to do some cathodic protection systems should be added following recoating operations. But on page 3 it says it's too late for that. It needs to be replaced in the 2018 budget. So can I ask you to clarify, we're going to replace the Port Elgin standpipe. It's going to be budgeted in the 2018 budget, and it's going to be constructed and built, a new standpipe, in 2018. And we're not going to do any mid-6-month repairs on the existing.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. So the water financial plan had the tower being replaced this year. We didn't go through the tendering process and get that done because we were waiting to see if we had received any of that funding. We didn't, so we put it off until this year, and this year we'll be going through RFP. There is enough funds in the reserve to pay for this project, and we'll move forward with that. But because we're doing that, we didn't feel that it was worth spending money on the coating of the existing tower in the meantime.
Councillor Dave Mayat, finally. Oh, sorry. Need to. Oh, well, I'll start at the other end next time, Dave, so I get your question. Just turn around. Any further questions? If not, that's the end of our agenda. We'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Madison and Councillor Rich, all in favor? We're adjourned for 10 minutes.